you're starting with a career, it is better where you go with a firm which is smaller, maybe it's startup or a mid-size, and you can see the tangible impact. My first job was in Tokyo, which was a great experience. In Japan itself and in Tokyo, like there's like design that permeates throughout, whether it's packaging, whether it is their subway trains, whether it is the vending machines they have. So everything is like very, very design oriented, very user focused in a way that like small things would like give you joy.
What's kind of one or two principles that you feel remain quite constant across these industries and you have seen that are generally not taken care well?
You need to be empathetic to your users. As UX designers, you need to know what is happening in the world. You need to keep yourself updated.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Design Hack podcast. Hope you guys are doing really well. Today we have a very special guest. I know we have been doing it for a while, but today we have a guest, Vijit, who is a senior experience designer at EA Electronic Arts, and we're going to get deeper into his journey, how he has become like a senior experience designer at a very great company out there, and we're going to learn more from his experiences and his journey out there. So let me call him on stage and let's get the podcast started. Hey Vijit, really nice to have you on the podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Likewise, okay. Excited to talk to you.
Awesome. So let's just kickstart the podcast with a little bit of your background, where you come from, how you got into experience design, a brief about where you are right now.
Yeah, sounds good. So essentially, my journey starts with me being a computer science engineer from India. Kind of went with the same route of trying to figure out like which is the best stream in engineering. And I liked that computer science was in labs instead of like it being outside, like mechanical or civil engineers. And also like just placement wise or company wise, like there's a lot of opportunities there. So that's why I kind of chose it. I would say I was not specifically passionate about it, but like more where like everybody kind of goes in that direction. And then I was kind of fortunate enough. So in India, as you know as well, that like we have companies come in for placements, and like we have like a placement cell. So I got my first job in a Japanese company called Hikari Sushin. And they were a sales company, and they were kind of doing this experiment, I would say, where they took 50 Indian engineering students all across like North Indian universities. And I was fortunate enough to get one of their jobs that they were giving. It was essentially a software engineer job. My first job was in Tokyo, which was a great experience, a very unique experience. The company taught us the language. They taught us how to behave in like a Japanese work culture. And yeah, Tokyo is a great city. Everything was great, but I wasn't enjoying work. I was spending a long amount of time doing coding and programming. In that, also, I was more leaning towards front end engineering rather than back end, because I could kind of see the tangibility of like making the changes in the code and seeing it implemented. But I was not very passionate about it, and it was something that like, okay, this is a great city, I'm enjoying, but I'm not enjoying what I'm working at. And then in Japan itself and in Tokyo, like there's like design that permeates throughout, whether it's packaging, whether it is their subway trains, whether it is the vending machines they have. So everything is like very, very design oriented, very user focused in a way that like small things would like give you joy. And I feel that's where I fell in love with design. Also, as a front end engineer, I was working with a lot of designers in my company there. So I was more curious about what they were doing rather than what I was working on. And that's where like the bug kind of stuck in, where I was like, maybe design is the industry. I still wanted to utilize my background in computer science and being in tech, but also kind of get more involved with design. And then I learned about the field and was pretty up and coming at that point. So I was like, how do I pivot? And then I found like there were around, I think, five universities in the States, and there was one university in Denmark that was kind of providing a master's in human computer interaction. And that's where, like, in Tokyo, I applied for universities, got into University of Maryland, and that's where my essentially my design journey started in the States. I did my master's for 2 years. I had a great opportunity of like doing my capstone with the Smithsonian Arts of Archives, which was a very cool experience. And then I kind of went in, worked for, I would say, a mid-sized company. It was an e-commerce company called Spreetail. They're like the largest third-party seller on Amazon and Walmart and eBay. So that was a very nice experience where I had a team that could kind of mentor me, but it wasn't as if like I was getting drowned in or doing like very minute things. Like I could still make a sufficient impact in it. And yeah, from there on, I worked there for a couple of years. And then, as you know, immigration is a huge, huge thing when you're in the States. So I got my PR and came to Canada. I worked for a startup, like an edtech startup here, and I was like the only designer in the company. So that was an interesting experience for sure, doing a lot of like foundational work. And thereon, I worked at EY for 3 years. And EY was a very different experience as well because it was a massive company compared to like the smaller companies I had worked earlier. And it was more of a consultancy framework. So we would get like different clients from like all different industries, whether it's healthcare, whether it's banking. So yeah, that was a cool experience. And then yeah, finally, like I switched a year ago at EA, and this was like one industry like I had not dwelled in enough, like entertainment and gaming. Consider myself a gamer, but it's still something that I take it as a challenge, that where I get to learn like a very different aspect of design and a very different kind of way of like interacting with users while you're designing.
That sounds really interesting and kind of very varied in a way because you've worked across different companies, industries, types of companies where they are in their level, also different countries as well. So I think that is
Yeah.
something kind of unique, which not a lot of people get to experience. And we'll come to that. I think that's where
Mhm.
I wanna start off first with design, and I wanna come to this question as well. But just let's get started because you have worked in gaming, edtech, some kind of e-commerce you said as well. Then
Yeah.
also other industries as well. What's kind of one or two principles that you feel remain quite constant across these industries, and you have seen that are generally not taken care well?
I would say, like, based on different industries and different sizes of the company, design plays a very different role. In some companies, design is at a very mature state where you don't have to kind of champion for your design. There are other companies where you're constantly championing or constantly trying to make like space for design. And I think the key criteria is just like you need to be empathetic to your users. You need to champion them because as businesses and as companies, business and ROI and money kind of take a forefront. So I feel that's like a balancing act. One is how you are essentially reflecting everything that the user wants, along with uh, also positioning in a way that the business would always adopt for like the change you're suggesting or like the flow that you want to reconfigure. So I feel that's one thing. Like, yeah, user is front and center. Your users keep changing. Maybe the access to the user also would change, but essentially design is user first always. And you have to pick your battles. Like, you can't be like, okay, my user wants X number of things. you can't also go with like so many things. You have to also play a balancing act where you have to convince your business that these are like the certain things. Maybe we do five changes instead of the 10 you're suggesting, and kind of positioning in that way. So yeah, I feel championing for design is one, and then like just keeping the users as your north star. Yeah.
That's interesting because I thought that different industries, especially different types of companies, may have different goals, because I know, like, especially with early stage startups, they tend to not focus a lot on the principles. They like just test fast, fail fast kind of scenarios,
Mhm.
which I feel is not bad. It's just that's where they are, and they have to do this
Yeah.
to to be at a place where they can respect research and other stuff more. But that's really interesting take. And I think now I want to come back to the earlier question that I had. With you working in different industries, different countries, different types of companies as well, what would you say has been a like would you say like this has been an upper hand for you in your career?
Um, I would say yes, in one sense where I'm very adaptable. Like if you are used to different kinds of cultures, especially like if you're working for a multinational company, like EA is pretty multinational. We have studios all across the world, and it kind of gives me an edge in the sense that, like, say I'm working with like a studio in Japan, right? Like I know that certain sensibilities of like how to interact with like Japanese clients or like people from there, versus people from the States have like a very different vibe than the Canadians have. So that is, I would say, very beneficial, because like based on different locations, when you're dealing with people, it definitely helps if you know the sensibilities or what things work or things don't work, when you're maybe interviewing them or presenting them. So yeah, I feel that that might be like one thing I can think of. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
I do want to jump a little more into the UX kind of,
Mhm.
because everybody knows like Japan is quite famous for its design and its aesthetics. So I do want to kind of put a little emphasis on what, because you have experienced this firsthand, right?
Yeah.
uh, what would you, and I think that's where you decided that you want to pivot more towards UX as well. So what would you say is like there, like which makes people feel that design is something like really permanent, like permanent there? So what would you say?
So there are two parts to it, right? One thing is, and I don't know the current state, but the time where I was in Japan, digital design is a little behind. One, maybe because of the language. Two, also the modality. Like a lot of people still use flip phones, which was very interesting to me. And then the third part is also like, because most of the businesses are just focusing on the Japanese market, you are kind of catering to what is culturally expected or whatever they are used to, which might not translate really well when you're trying to grow, like you're trying to grow in different markets, maybe like India or maybe even like US or Canada, right? So I feel that was something I was always not a fan of. But when it comes to what inspired me, it was essentially like, even for UX designers, we can be in any industry. Like it doesn't need to be like a digital industry, right? And just seeing the way how different devices are starting to come up, right? Like even though they weren't very successful, if you've seen like the Rabbit device that came, which was like a pin here, or even like the Vision Pro, like that Apple came up with, they're like different modalities, right? Like which we are constantly changing. So it's not just like textbook like apps or like textbook websites or web applications that you need to design. So in that essence, I feel in Japan, like they are very meticulous. Then the other thing is that even though they're catering to a very specific market, they know the user through and through. And then they add like one instance of like an additional thing that you would never realize. Like a very simple example was, if you go to like a 7-Eleven, they're very known for like their sandwiches. They have like a very famous egg sandwich, and just the packaging of the egg sandwich generally, like sandwiches, if you package it in a certain way, they're really hard to open, right? Like they're like kind of glued in on one side, and then you kind of open it. In Japan, like they had like a kind of like a pull kind of thing on the side. So you just pull it and like you can take it out. And I was like, why has nobody thought of this? Like I've had sandwiches all around, but like why is this the first time? Right. And even like if you buy like a lot of gum, they have like this kind of notepad kind of thing with multiple papers. So like if you don't have anything to throw it, you can use that. So like there's certain aspects, right? Even vending machines, for that matter, like they're super convenient. When my parents had come to Japan, there was like a SIM card vending machine where you could just scan your passport and get like a data SIM card. So things like that was just like, wow, this makes life very easier for users. They're very minute things, but they give you joy. So I feel those were kind of the nuances where I'm like, wow, like this is something like I would really want to kind of learn more about like the human psychology of it, of like how you want to align your design based on like different mental models. So yeah, I think that was kind of like what jogged in my, rather than the tech of it, which I feel maybe now they might have improved. Like it's been a while since I've been in touch with like Japanese apps or Japanese websites, but at least at that point it was very text heavy. There was no concept of white space there. And then a lot of it was also kind of transition to it working on flip phones as well.
Pretty interesting, because even though you say that there was not a lot of trend of digital design, they still used a bunch of technologies to ease the experiences, like the
Yeah.
vending machine and other stuff as well. I feel, uh, and that's why I think even when we kind of fantasize about Japan through anime or any other stuff, like I think people really think of like a really heavy tech city and kind of that light shimmering in the night. But I know that's conceptualizing, but people still see that tech is being used, but the screens are still maybe less. That's what I would say. And maybe it ties back to, that's why we think that maximum amount of blue zones in the like in the world are in Japan as well. Again, maybe these are some stuff that they're still following because of
Yeah.
this. But that is pretty interesting. So awesome. So you did in Japan, then you, I think, moved to US for your masters as well, right?
Yeah.
How was that experience? Like, how was being in US studying HCI? What did you learn? How what would you say are the challenges that you faced when you were there as well?
Yeah, I feel it was a very good experience, especially because when you have a background in like a very one specific field, it's very hard to kind of broaden your horizon in a way. You're very siloed in like, I was very siloed in like my engineering way of doing things. And that was something where like doing this master's for 2 years and kind of integrating it, doing it full time, I feel was very necessary for me. It might be different for other people. Like people can do like boot camps, or like there are different opportunities that people can do when they're pivoting. One, I had the time to do it. I would say like coming from like a sense of privilege that I had the time and the money to kind of pursue it, but like a lot of people don't do that. But I would say one thing that was very unique about this and that really prompted me to go for this program at University of Maryland was one, their HCIL lab is one of the oldest in the world. It's 30 years old. And then they were contributed to like coming up with the first hyperlink, which was super cool. Like we use hyperlinks everywhere, and it's a big factor. So it was a very research heavy organization. It wasn't so much as aligned towards, I would say, professional streaming, which I liked because, in a sense, I could kind of get into and understand what are like the different nuances when you're designing for people. And Also, it gave me an opportunity because Maryland is really close to DC. They have like a lot of clients that are from the US government. So, like, if somebody is doing Smithsonian, somebody was working with Library of Congress, which was a very unique opportunity. Whereas, like I would say, if people do it in the West Coast, it's generally tech companies, right? But here, like there were these really massive, highly funded government organizations with very backward technology and apps that like really needed a lot of massaging and a lot of love. So I feel that was like a very unique opportunity. And then where I was talking about my capstone with the Smithsonian, that was amazing. Like honestly, like as someone who loves design, I got an opportunity to interview like art curators, artists, like really renowned professors as well. And it was just fascinating, just thinking and learning about like how they think about art. And because I was working with the archives, so it was an interesting task of like how artists or like curators actually find art through archives. What is their experience of kind of discovering through different artifacts? And these artifacts like were really old as well. Like most of it, like half of it were digitized. You had to kind of go into the archives to find stuff. So there was like an element of like physical mapping as well as digital mapping, which was really fun. And yeah, we did this for like our last semester, which was like 6 months long. So it was a pretty cool task. And that kind of made a really good foundation, at least for me, where I was kind of pursuing or starting to pursue my career in like design from there on.
Pretty interesting. I think a lot of people now are also thinking, or maybe like 2 years back or 1 years back, were thinking a lot to kind of do their masters. But I think, as you said, there in the last few years there have been a shift between these two sides: either do a master or either do a boot camp. Again, what you said, everybody has their own preference. Sometimes boot camps works better for some folks. Sometimes masters works better for some folks. But I think one thing a lot of people have to realize, at least with masters, it takes time. But I think especially with doing abroad, you get a lot of exposure, which especially from people from India, I would say, because we are from India, I think they don't get that exposure if you haven't been out there, and it's quite different.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is, at least in my experience, like starting doing my bachelor's in India versus doing my master's in the States, the main difference was like just the curriculum. It was very, very practical based, very tangible projects, or any kind of like collaboration that would we were doing was very aligned to like we would what we would do when we are in the industry. Whereas like Indian teaching was a little more theoretical comparatively. I would say like it kind of worked for certain streams. For certain streams, maybe you need like more of an exposure in that. The other big aspect was like the importance of research, just the amount of money and resources that universities spend to maintain their standings for like being a grade A research college or a university. I feel that was really fascinating, meeting really renowned people as well, which was very, very cool. I was also like doing some graduate assistantship in my university as well, and it gave me an opportunity to interview around 110 professors throughout the university. I got to interview some Pulitzer Prize winners as well, which was super cool. And I feel that was also kind of aligned, even though the GA ship that I was doing was not specifically design oriented. It was more about kind of onboarding professors to this new platform that they were trying to introduce to maintain their resumes and like their research papers. But yeah, it was a fascinating experience in that essence as well. Just kind of honing my art of like doing research or doing interviews. I feel that is something that a lot of people don't talk about in design, even though, yeah, there is a separate stream where you can become like a UX researcher. But as a UX designer or an experienced designer, you're constantly researching, even if it's like at a limited capacity. And I would say like most companies I worked with, like I've done some sort of research, even though it might be like very grassroots or guerrilla style, or like something which is more like a lab kind of setup as well.
That is pretty interesting. I think this is a different thing which very less folks in India get to experience, especially the graduate assistantship side of it. I think like I when I did my masters, I used to work for as a research assistant for a project for old folks, and I think the biggest thing I really loved is that they obviously they have metrics and thing, but they are not trying to make money with that
Yeah.
project, and I think that for some reason it just does not put a lot of pressure on me, and I was able to kind of do much more better research as compared to other projects.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something like, so whenever I'm like mentoring junior designers or like just meeting people who want to enter, and they kind of struggle, especially like if you're doing like a very expedited boot camp, they struggle with having like real life projects. So I always advise people to kind of go through their like several different resources where you can find like NGOs and like nonprofits that you can work with and get real experience, because it's a win-win for you as well if you have like the time to kind of get into and do these real projects, and it's a win-win for the organization as well, where you're doing this for free, they're getting free labor, and like they can also kind of get good advantages, and also in a way you're also kind of practicing your art of like design, right? Like whatever you're learning in your curriculum, whenever you are learning versus whenever you are actually applying, those things are very, very different. So to just have that kind of tangible knowledge, or like a playground where you can test it out, I feel it's great.
No, I agree. I think that's pretty amazing. I think these experiences definitely puts in your and mine, everybody who has done experienced that, like all of those experiences does kind of adds up to where everybody gets to be,
Yeah.
and it does provide like a good kind of diverse experience in someone else's profile, right? So let's get back to where you are now, and because I
Mhm.
think it's pretty unique industry, not a lot of people get to experience this industry as a experienced designer. Being at EA, what would you let us start with? What would you say are some of the key challenges that like EA tries to solve in UX for gaming, and how do you guys go about it?
Yeah, so my position in EA is also very different. So I don't personally involved in like creating the games. So like whatever interface that you're seeing on the game side of it, that's not something that I'm involved in. What I'm involved in is we have a core team called EADP, Digital Platforms, and essentially we are the tech that supports all the different features in different kind of game studios. Whether so, my field is mostly related to gameplay experiences as well as social. So, and that specifically is if you play any kind of multiplayer game on any of the different platforms or different EA games, we are the engine that's kind of powering it. So I would say like the main thing that people don't realize is like games are very, very technical. They involve so much of research and so much of the tech work that goes on pushing each title, and especially like these game titles are being pushed every year. Like you have like one after the other. It's not even like you're taking 5 6 years to push out. So the amount of stress and the amount of kind of work that these game producers and game designers and even the game devs are doing, it's very hard to get any time from them, and those are kind of like my main users in a way. So the main difference I feel from other industries is like if you're working on an internal tech, generally your users are very accessible. But in a gaming industry, those users are very busy. So how do you make time and kind of convince them that like the time they want to make is worth their effort? So I feel that that's like been the biggest challenge, and I feel it kind of comes with like building relationships, kind of having that rapport, that whatever work that you are doing, you're essentially serving them. You're not like just being very siloed in like this is my way or the highway kind of thing. It's just like we want to work together and work in a way that would improve their workflows. So I think that's one very unique thing. The other is my most of my job is not designing a lot. Like I probably design 20-30%. It's mostly strategy and visioning, along with a lot of research that's kind of backed into it. So it's kind of very different where like when I was like a junior designer or when I was just beginning my career, I was mostly doing the pixel perfect thing or like also working on design systems, working a lot on Figma. Whereas the more senior you get, like you are involved in like the business decisions, you are involved with the product team. We're doing like design workshops and facilitating these like brainstorming sessions with different stakeholders. So I feel those things kind of excite me these days, which is interesting. Where I was like earlier, if I was not building something tangible, I was like, am I designing? Am I a designer? But now, like just being a part and being a huge part in a way where design sometimes does not get like a seat, especially in the business decisions. I feel that's like very exciting where you can drive those conversations, you can champion your users, and kind of nudge people in that direction through your collaborative skills, through your brainstorming skills, through your facilitating skills. So yeah, I feel that's been very unique, at least since the time I've like started working at EA. Yeah.
That is pretty interesting. I think that does also comes up as you get senior, not just EA, any other company as well. I
Mm.
think uh, obviously you design less but do more strategic thinking, strategic planning as well. So I think that's very interesting. Would you say is that because you have worked at a startup even after getting a good chunk of experience, would you say does that stay the same when you were at that startup, or was that kind of a mix? You were still doing good chunk of design but also doing good chunk of other stuff as well?
I feel for that startup, I was the only designer, so things were a little different. Yes, I was definitely designing quite a bit because I was the only designer, and two, I don't think I had like a lot of like say in the direction or like the visioning that we want to take like our design to. Like the product team would kind of just give me a direction, and I would have to follow it to a certain extent, maybe push them a bit in certain cases, but overall like I felt like I was fighting a lonely battle, right? Like I didn't have any backing in that sense, whereas like in bigger companies or companies where design is like a very big part, you don't have to fight that battle. So I think that's a unique thing, but EA is different in that way as well. Even though it's a big company, he is very tech heavy. I would say probably like 70 odd employees are tech people, are devs, which is a huge chunk compared to like general tech companies. Like they might be very tech heavy in the beginning and then they kind of like shift to a more balanced kind of layout. Whereas EA in that sense is very tech heavy, and that has its own challenges as well, but that also has its own advantages, where most of the conversations are driven by tech as well as business, which is good for certain fields like gaming. It might not work for certain other fields. So
That's interesting. What would you say, like, because I was thinking as you were saying, what would you say, like, especially in the startup space, was your biggest learning?
Yeah. Startup phase, I think the biggest learning is just like honing the skills to evangelize UX design. I think that's like the biggest piece of it. When you're the only person, you have to prove your metal. You have to prove that the kind of work you're doing, you're not like just a glorified graphic designer or a UI designer. I think that was like the main learning of like how do you build certain skills? What do you highlight and emphasize when you're pitching it to your business or pitching it to clients in a way that they might not buy in the entire process, but like they might buy into the process that you actually want to kind of push through. So I feel that was definitely one. The other is like just wearing a lot of hats, doing everything yourself. Where I was kind of building our own design system, even though it was kind of a wrapper on Material UI. That was an interesting and a unique challenge that I had to make, where I made our own UI kit. And then moving forward with doing the kind of research, like it was more of like an ad hoc style of research, where um, the main clients that we were kind of pitching a product to, I would just like do cold calls with them. Like we didn't have like a system of recruiting, so just cold calls, cold messaging, cold emailing, to kind of find any kind of user to validate your designs. I think that's another aspect which was tough, but it was fulfilling in a way where once you accomplished it, you're like, okay, I thought this would be a bigger task earlier when you start doing it, but like when you accomplish it, like, wow, that was like pretty good. And yeah, I feel startups make you think a lot. Like you have a short amount of time, you need to learn as much as you can. Some people definitely get burnt out, and it's a lifestyle for some people, not for all. um, but I like at least at the point where I was in my career, I felt like there was definitely a threshold, like after like working for some time, where I was like, yeah, I'm working and I'm learning, but I don't have people to kind of guide me. I don't have like some senior member in design that I would like look up to or kind of get guidance from. So those were certain aspects. And then working in a design team as well. Like, so the first design team I worked with was one of the most fabulous design teams I've worked with. Like, I remember when I was leaving them, like both me and my manager were in tears, because like we were so attached to each other and we really respected the way we used to work. And I feel that was another aspect that I was missing, where people don't talk a lot about like the importance of a good design team. I'm not talking about like just your managers or like just people you're reporting to, just your peers. Because sometimes it can be a lonely battle, like just pushing design where like you're the only designer among like 20 devs, and like 5 product people. So in those cases, like having a strong foundational team where you can come back, do these critique sessions or feedback sessions with them, have like pattern meetings where you're kind of discussing if you want to introduce a new design pattern to your tool set, or just like simply kind of doing these. We used to do kind of like these design Olympics kind of things, where you just pick up a random topic in the company that you're working that has never been touched, is probably not even related to you, but you try to kind of redesign it. So those kind of exercises, as well as like feedback, I feel from peers is very, very useful. And it also kind of keeps you motivated, where you have people to look up to as well as the like if you have like a sense of kind of mentoring people or kind of guiding them as well. I feel it's rewarding in that aspect as well.
That's really interesting. I think what you said in the starting startups makes you think a lot. That is really, really right. I think not just about design, but also I think because in startup it's small team, you get to talk to every stakeholder,
Mhm.
and I feel it's very underrated, but you get to know a business. And I feel
Yeah.
it definitely helps you in the longer run as a designer.
Mhm.
As you are saying, now as design is getting a seat at the table, knowing everything definitely puts a bonus to it,
Yeah.
right? And another thing that you said about the the importance of having a good design team is really good. I still remember at the startup I used to work for, I had a very great team. Even though I started alone, we built it up. But the team that I had, it definitely not just about passing on ideas or anything. Also, they pushing me to be a better designer is something which
Yeah,
people don't realize. It just happens,
100%.
but you
Yeah.
don't realize it. It is happening
Mhm.
because you see the amount of great effort they are putting in, they see the amount of effort you are putting in, and the product that is getting out is like so good, you feel like we have to push and push for it.
Yeah, yeah,
So
100%. Couldn't agree more. And I feel that's another aspect where I always encourage people who just trying to get into a job. Like maybe the barrier for entering startups might be low, but I would say like trying for a startup or like maybe a mid-sized company that has like maybe 3 or 4 people in the design team, I feel that has a tremendous output over like maybe you're the only designer kind of situation where you have people to guide you as well, but also you have to keep working fast and like wear a lot of hats as you're kind of going through it. I feel that kind of balance is just ideal. Obviously, like it kind of depends on like how and why like the person would end up going there. But I would say like when people are just focusing on like these really big companies or like the FANG companies or reputed companies in the beginning of their career, it is not as beneficial as maybe a startup or a mid-sized company. And the main reason is because everything is so structured in these big companies. Like they've figured out their stuff, and when it's super structured, whatever you end up doing is very niche. It's not very fulfilling in a way where a junior designer wants to learn everything, every aspect of different ways a UX designer or like a experienced designer can contribute. But when you are very defined that maybe you're an interaction designer at Google or like some other company, then you're hyper focused on just interaction design. And that can be great like if you're very certain that that's something you want to do your entire life or you want to be the best in that. But I feel just the way things are going in the industry, you can't keep all your eggs in one basket. You need to have like more of an overall roundness to what kind of designer you are, because based on different situations you might want to switch into like a different kind of role.
no, I agree. I think that's where I can actually cue the next question, which is more around the trends that are going on right now. So,
Mhm.
because you have worked in various industries, companies, and everything, and also the industry you're working is pretty unique as well. So, the next thing I want to ask is that what would you say are the key trends that you're seeing that are shaping how UX will look like in the future. Obviously, because you're in gaming for gaming, and also with like AI, like AR, VR is was picking up
Mhm.
for a while. So, what do you see where the UX is going, maybe in future?
I think these are very exciting times for UX, just because the way things are changing, the way technology is just keeping at a pace where it's like hard to catch up. UX will play a much bigger role because the more you introduce new technology, essentially users are going to be using it, right? So you have to cater those kind of technologies and the way it's designed according to users. The way of interacting with that technology would also constantly change, right? Like with, as I was mentioning with Vision Pro, like now they've kind of have like that pinch kind of movement instead of like maybe a mouse or like maybe a controller. And those things will keep changing even like with the Ray-Bans glasses, right? Like it's also a different modality of like interacting with a specific device. So I think the best thing and the trend right now obviously is LLMs are huge. They're everywhere. You can't ignore them. They are in your design tool. Figma has them. If you go and you see like searching through like Google, you have Gemini, there's Chat GPT. So it's everywhere. And I feel that's where another aspect of like modality is coming up, right? Like where instead of like users depending on like a search engine. People are kind of getting onto LLMs to kind of figure out stuff or like find stuff, and that kind of changes the original user flow or like the user journey that the user would do when they would start with like an application or start with finding a specific website, right? So that kind of changes like the way people think, and the way the people start their journey from. So it's very important for UX designers to kind of learn how these technologies work. They should be avid users of it, because these technologies are going at such a fast pace that you won't find users who are using it, right? Like you are actually creating new kind of ways of interacting with the users, and the best way to do it is you be a user yourself. So as much as you can, like use it in your daily life. I use LLMs quite a bit, like even for my research. Like if I have to like transcribe stuff and like find like key highlights or like key quotes from my users, or maybe even helping with affinity mapping, it's super useful. Like instead of like traversing through these long 1 hour 2 hour transcripts, like LLMs do it really quickly. So you need to figure out also ways of incorporating LLMs or like any kind of like new technology that's coming in your current workflow, so that you are an active user of it and you can understand how to design for it. I think that's one part of it. The second is that you need to figure out a way where you need to understand how LLMs or machine learning works. And I'm not talking about development. I'm not talking that you need to know how to maybe program a model. You need to know how these models are working, what kind of data is being sourced in it. From a bird's eye view, you need to understand essentially what are the limitations or what are the feasibility aspects of your machine learning, of your AI, so that you can design it better. In my previous company at EY, like I got a great opportunity where they were creating their own LLM tool, which was called EYQ. And the only thing I had as a basis was ChatGPT, right? At that point, there was like not a lot of LLMs, and ChatGPT is primarily like more of like a chat-based kind of interface. Whereas this EYQ, we were kind of pitching it as a tool for consultants to help them kind of draft these presentations for their clients. Um, and it had to be very interactive, rather than it being just like a chat interface where the user would write something, it would kind of output something. We wanted a way where a user can essentially create a pitch while being on like some kind of um, conversational chat interface. So that was like an exciting thing where I knew everything what ChatGPT was doing at that point, and leveraging like at least the foundation of like what ChatGPT does well, I could design at least the foundational piece. And then like whatever was happening, like I was kind of constantly testing it with our consultants or with the users, kind of understanding that would it work with their flow or not. Because at this point, like I'm kind of making assumptions. This is a new technology. The only thing that I'm trying to test is it better than your current workflow? If yes, then we are in the right direction. If no, then we kind of go back on the drawing board and redo it again. So I feel that's one thing. Like as UX designers, you need to know what is happening in the world. You need to keep yourself updated. I follow a lot of like subscriptions. Like there's a subscription called sidebar.io. It kind of gives me 5 design articles daily. And that's a good way of like kind of being religious. Like even before I start my work, I would just go through like 5 articles. They're not specific to design, but like design adjacent, so it could be related to technology, it could be related to like maybe a new kind of programming language, so things like that. And that really helps me kind of keep in touch with most things. And then other than that, yeah, just like social media, like you can kind of uh, make your algorithms in a way where it's kind of providing you stuff that you want, right? Like so if I look into a lot of design related stuff, I would get a lot of design related stuff. So that also keeps helps where you're kind of keeping up with different trends and like different kinds of ways users are building. And yeah, also I would say tech reviewers as well, like Marquez is like a massive tech reviewer. I follow him with like different kinds of technologies. Does a great job like with every new technology that kind of comes in, and that also kind of gives you a lens that what you might be designing, right? And the same thing would apply to a field like EA, right? You're not just relying on your console or your PCs anymore. Maybe VR gaming is one thing that might blow up like in a couple of years, or it's already blown up. So I feel that's why it kind of helps you, like whatever industry you are in, maybe they eventually take that route where they figure out, okay, this device might be the next big thing. So you're already ahead of the curve where at least you know how things function, you know, very detailed orientation of like what are the things that you need to design for, and that essentially helps you.
Well, that is a very interesting take. I think uh, that is what I've been seeing as well. That you need. I still remember I gave a talk 3 years back or 2 years back, and it was an in-person talk in Ahmedabad, and somebody, and at the time, just ChatGPT AI was really booming, and there was a saying
Yeah.
that UX designers, coders, every other field will be replaced by AI, and people were very scared. So a lot of folks were asking, what do we do?
Mhm.
And I had a simple answer. It just, you need, if you don't uh, know how to use AI in your workflows, somebody who knows will replace you.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
100%.
So I think that's what we need to understand. Even now, there are quite interesting other tools, not just AI tools. Like, even, let's say, a lot of people now are learning how to do Framer. A lot of people now
Mhm.
how learning how to do. There's a prototyping tool called Play, which is very quick iOS prototyping, and there are a bunch of tools out there. People are using Replit,
Mhm.
VO, Cursor, a lot of these apps to understand and quickly, not exactly code, but quickly make prototypes which can actually be more dynamic than Figma prototype, let's just
Yeah,
say, right? So I think needing to always upskilling yourself, not just in AI but generally as well, it's quite has its own upsides as well. Uh,
yeah,
while it is very interesting field, you just don't want to watch. You want to be involved in growing, right? So
100%. Yeah, and I feel with the growth aspect, like another thing that I do selfishly as well, and also kind of in a way that helps me become a better designer is just like I've started teaching UX, which was something that I maybe like 5 years ago, like if you were to ask like Vijit, like would you want to teach, I would probably say no. But it kind of started with like the pandemic where I was like, we were working from home, we had like a little bit of time. So I started with like just online kind of tutoring through this like Berlin based company. And that was like an interesting experience where I would just kind of like grade assignments from like students on like different UX stuff. And that kind of like really clicked in me that, okay, this is nice. Like I'm enjoying mentoring people, and there's something tangible and something nice about that. But also I'm keeping up with stuff because most of the curriculum is based on what's happening right now. Like when I did my masters, it was very different. Like it was focused on what was the curriculum at that point. But when you are constantly teaching, you also have an option of like also learning yourself. And that's an aspect that I'm really enjoying. And then I recently started teaching with BrainStation. They're like a boot camp, and I'm really enjoying. Like I've done my in my second cohort right now, and then just interacting with students, kind of also gauging how people from different fields have like very different perspectives to UX or to design. And it's always fascinating to talk to them, just like learning the kind of ideas they have for design, and as well as I was saying, selfish interest of like me also keeping up with what's happening, right? There's a lot more of AI in a lot of curriculums, which is like really interesting to see, where I felt like maybe academia would kind of take it the other way, where they were like AI is probably plagiarism, whereas here it's kind of promoted in a way that you need to incorporate it in your workflows, like how you were saying just right now. And I feel if you don't, then you're probably like a slower designer, and like people can easily kind of outpace you. So it's really important to kind of keep up with that.
Oh, 100%. And uh, that's very interesting take towards this, because there's no way if or but you have to. It
Hmm.
just depends on how much or how less you want to do it. But that's an interesting take. I think it has been an amazing journey to, like, it has been an amazing experience to see how you have grown from starting with engineering, then moving to Japan, then states, learning and everything, and then moving to Canada. uh, I think I do want to sum this podcast, and I'm gonna have a last question for you. So what one piece of advice would you give to your younger self, in a way, when you were starting UX? Let's say a lot of people would be here just starting UX, just started UX, still figuring out what to do next. And because you also teach these folks, what would you say one or two pieces of advice uh, would you give them, other than obviously learning AI and everything?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say is just the way how the tech industry has changed, right? Like now, it's a lot more volatile. We're seeing so many layoffs, and those things can be disheartening and scary. The main aspect of it is that you need to focus on what you want to learn. And the thing is, where there's so much social media and there's so much pressure from the industry that, oh, you need to go into like the Airbnbs or like the Uber or like the Googles of like the design, that people take it very hard when they're starting their journey, because it is especially even harder than when I started, where the competition was not as much. Companies were kind of investing slowly into it. But right now, because it's become even more competitive and even more volatile, um, people should focus more on learning rather than like a brand name or kind of like a cloud chasing kind of approach. And it can be difficult, right? Like it's like you want to compare to your peers, you want to compare to like people around you that are working maybe in great companies. um, and honestly, like great companies may look good on a resume, but if you want to learn, you can learn anywhere. You can learn more in startups, you can learn more in like mid-sized firms as well. The main thing I would advise a lot of people, and even a younger me, is whenever you're interviewing for a company, you also need to interview them, because you will be spending your time, your money, your resources, kind of giving your blood and sweat to the company. So you need to understand what you might get from the company. Like if they are investing in any kind of education plans where they focus on, like they have a budget for conferences or budget for learning, I think that's like one aspect that they should always ask, maybe the recruiter or the hiring manager as they're kind of interviewing. Another is also kind of showcasing or understanding what the team structure is, right? Like with the team aspect of it, like if the team is good or like has a good foundation, I think that's really beneficial for junior designers. And then third is field is not as important when you're beginning, because you slowly kind of learn like maybe a specific industry or field that you're really good at, but strive for positions where you would wear multiple hats, so that you can find your niche, you can find the thing that you would want to really strive in and like really excel. When you are too siloed in the beginning, you're not exploring all aspects of design, and that might be something that could be counteractive. Maybe you have like a great name brand, but eventually after 3 4 years you don't see a path where you can raise, or like maybe see a path where you're getting fulfilled, and you might need to backtrack to a position where you're exploring everything. So I feel those are the certain aspects where, one, you shouldn't like chase for names. I feel they're overhyped. And two is just like focus on what the company would also give you, because that's an important thing.
Very interesting, but very interesting because, like, if I would be a candidate, and because you are in a big tech, and if you say to me that they are overhyped, my first reaction without thinking, without knowing this, would be you are there, you would think that, right?
Yeah.
But I agree with what you are saying that at first it's tough. It's really tough out there. Second, I think even if we compare with like coders, they have more leverage. If they are smart enough, they have more leverage to get there sooner as compared to a designer.
Yeah.
uh, because like they have their skills, and their skills are more like they can see, people can see it more.
Yeah.
uh, with designers it's a little vague, like I would say it, because you have to prove it. Like it gets really hard sometimes to prove that you are worth it,
Yeah.
while for coders it doesn't. uh, so I think it was really good point that not focusing on names, because I feel even though startups are hard, other fields are hard, I have felt that, at least I have not experienced big tech, but I will say the maximum amount of learning I have gained is because I was in a startup.
Yeah, 100%. And I would say like I would say they're overhyped, like the
Okay.
big names. I think it's just the time and the place
Mm,
where when you're beginning to learn, maybe they're not the best match, at least for designers. Maybe for
true.
developers, maybe for other kind of industries, they might be a good match. I think it's just when you're beginning with your career, your focus should be more on learning. And yeah, there'll come a time where maybe like
Mm,
even like the Googles or like the main FANG companies might not be a big thing. Maybe you start your own firm, right? Like maybe that is like the biggest goal that you have. So I feel that kind of depends on person to person. Maybe some people really enjoy, thrive in an environment where it's very focused and very foundationally solid, and then you can kind of just follow the steps. Some people like the kind of chaos and they thrive in that. So it kind of depends on the flavor that you want. But, and this is my opinion, where I believe that if you're starting with a career, it is better where you go with a firm which is smaller, maybe it's startup or a mid-size, and you can see the tangible impact. I feel that
mm,
is the basis of like why I feel passionate about the kind of work I do, is the kind of impact that you see the users benefiting from. I feel that's really enriching. And with bigger firms, like they might get funneled through because they're like really massive, and like you won't be able to kind of see that tangible aspect as much, other than the learning aspect, I would say, again, because everything is very streamlined. So like whenever like you throw in kind of any kind of chaos or any kind of confusion, then maybe the person might not be able to handle those situations. Yeah.
no, I think I agree with your statements as well. That I think no matter what, if it's good or not for you, that's pretty clear that you should actually focus when you are early in your career on learning rather than any name, anything else. Because
Yeah.
uh, one more issue that happens when you're focusing on names, you forget that why you were here in the first place, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So uh, I think that's pretty amazing and pretty good insights from you. Now we're at the end of the podcast. I think it was really great talking to you about your journey, and I think all the insights, tips, and tricks, your journey was really interesting, and I think this is really useful for people. I do have one question before you go, because we have
Mhm.
talked about different industries. What would you say is like a is like a field which is related to UX, and if somebody is not able to crack UX, can actually pivot to without changing. a bunch of things that they're looking for?
I think the most closely aligned is probably UI design. UI design is like a specific niche that you can figure out. There are definitely a lot of UI components that a UX designer also has to do. But when you're dealing with like smaller companies where they don't have like a specific design language or design kit, I think that's where like UI designers can really thrive, where they're like creating essentially from scratch of like how the branding needs to be, or like the kind of design kit that we want to kind of project for a company. I think that that is definitely one. um, I would say other than that, even depending on like how passionate you are about like UX research is also another field. I have some peers who've kind of pivoted more from a design position to a more UX research position, and they really enjoy it there. And I feel that's also a very different skill set, but you need to be very sure that that's something you want to do full time and not like do any kind of design. So it kind of depends on person to person, but yeah, I feel UX research and UI design might be like the two tangents that people can take, especially learning what they are strong at.
Awesome. Sounds definitely great. And I think these two are pretty great fields to people to explore if they want to really pivot and kind of niche down in something else. Really amazing to have you, Vijit, here. Thanks everyone who have been watching so far. I will link down Vijit's LinkedIn below. And if you have any mentorship link, I remember you had something, I may link down below as well. So anybody who want to reach out to him can kind of contact him on LinkedIn or anything else. And thanks a lot, Vijit. And it was really pleasure having you here.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks a lot, Abhay.
Awesome.